Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Vorbeck Williams. I'm here to interview Paula Coomer about her latest book titled Somebody Should Have Scolded the Girl. Paula's on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast. So I'll say good morning, Paula.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just about to prove that we're about to speak to somebody, to prove that we're about to speak to somebody who's quite extraordinary. I want to read you a little bit from her official biography. Okay, let me see here. Here's where it is. Paula's been a migrant farm laborer, a waitress, a bean sorter in a cannery, a cosmetics saleswoman, a federal officer, a nurse, and a university writing instructor. And I think, Paula, we can just stop right now and talk about how to sort beans.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Not too many people know that my first job in high school was pollinating petunias. So you and I have some things in common.
Oh my gosh, that's lovely.
All right, so can you tell us something about the books you've written? I've read the wonderful novel Jagged Edge of the Sky.
Oh, thank you. Well, I have an array of books. I'm not somebody who sticks just to one genre. My first book was poetry, and I've since published a second book of poetry, and then I've got two collections of short stories, two novels, and two food books, a food memoir and a follow-up cookbook. And I don't know. I have heard people say that you should focus on one genre and just make yourself an expert in that. But for me, there were just one genre just never worked. It just didn't, and I never ever considered not doing both novels and poetry and nonfiction. So
You sort of have to write what you feel you want to write when you want to write it. You know, that's what I think. So
yeah, that's my perspective too. So
yeah, I don't write in one genre either.
yeah.
Okay, so Somebody Should Have Scolded the Girl is a collection of short stories and a novella, all under the same cover. The stories are packed with characters I've never met, a few I don't want to meet, and others I know better than I know myself. I actually learned from some of those characters about myself. The reader finds images, strange episodes, utterly common moments, all seen in a new light, all impossible to walk away from. I have an example here. Through the description of the rundown cowboy bar and the chalkboard that hung there in that story, you successfully created a whole community of people before the characters even walked through the door. Um, I, I don't think I could do that. And I don't know how you do it. Is it through your eye or your imagination that you're able to bring a room, a building, or a person to life?
Well, I love that question. And excuse me, it seems like I'm going to have allergies this morning. Um, I I think there's a part of me that might be a filmmaker or a visual artist because when I'm out in the world, I think I see things like I'm seeing through a camera lens, and which means that I like focus down on a particular item. And when it comes to writing, um, what I want to do is describe that thing fully so that the reader's having the same experience I have of kind of looking through the camera. And I feel like that any article, any item that you run across in the world carries the weight of its history with it. Here's a good example. I was just yesterday, we have a little local eatery here that's a very old tavern, and I don't eat burgers, but they have the best burgers apparently anywhere around. And so some of the guys working on the house yesterday went over there for lunch, and I stopped by, and I was just astonished by everything that was in that place and how long it had obviously been there. And so for me, walking into that place, I could feel the weight of that history. And I could have written an entire book sitting right there yesterday afternoon, just based on everything I saw. I began to imagine the eons, the many, many decades of people who had come in there, and the people who'd handled the cue sticks, and the people who'd sat at the bar or sat in the diner booths. So it's just something, I don't know, maybe it also just comes with the storyteller, but I when I teach people writing, I teach something called assemblage art, or assemblage, where you put together art from found items. So for me, when I'm out in the world, whether I'm going to the store or going for a walk, or going to the doctor's office, or whatever I'm doing, I'm kind of tuned in to things that might catch my eye that could potentially be incorporated into a story someplace. I've been accused of my fiction being too real, and I think that's part of it, because I'm gathering the elements for any given story or novel from the world around me. And if I can't conjure in my imagination what it is I feel like I need, I will go out and look for it, or I'll go out and have the experience I need so that I can bring reality to that, to whatever that action is. So I maybe that helps answer your question. Yeah. I don't know, but I think it's a combination of those things, and then describing in such a way so that somebody could depict it, so that somebody could film it or draw it. That's always part of my goal, but also bringing the essence of that thing with it. And so maybe that's what you sense with that chalkboard. That original chalkboard, the idea from that chalkboard came from one that one of my sons made for us several years back in his shop. So it was a thing that like hangs in our kitchen, to write notes on. That's where the idea for that chalkboard came.
Great. In that story of the cowboy bar, I was amused by the owner, Diane, questionable but unyielding morals. She's both an abortionist and an underground adoption agent. She is a bootlegger, but only for her friends. She won't allow anyone to get drunk in her bar because she cares a lot about them all, of her customers, and she wants them not to have an accident when they drive home. I actually quite admired her. Tell us about Diane and the roots of that story.
Oh gosh, well, it comes from a couple of places. So you might get the impression that I've spent a little time inside honky tonks and bars and things like that.
Why not?
It's the basis for the Northwest. What can I say? We love to gather in dark, cozy places. But so there was I had a conversation about, I think it's been close to 15 years ago. I was in Enterprise, Oregon, walking down the street with somebody who lived there, another writer, and she said to me, she pointed to this place. Actually, I can never remember if it's in Joseph or Enterprise. It might be in Joseph, Oregon, which is another little town just up the road. There are two like artistic communities in the mountains that favorite vacation spot. And we're walking past this place called the Cowboy Bar. Big hand-carved sign over the doorway. And she said the FBI once raided that place. It was known as a place you could go and basically get a black market baby. And it just stuck. I went home and wrote it on a file card, 4x6 file card. I have a system of these colored 4x6 cards for recording any kind of ideas like that. But just that sentence never left my mind. And the idea that somebody in this little bitty mountain town in Oregon that might be the place somebody might drive to get to get a black market baby just blew my mind. Well, there were a couple of other situations that I then connected. I brought in that story. Diane is based on a woman I knew about in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, who had she had sold her liquor license. You know, in Idaho, there's only so many liquor licenses in the entire state. So in order to open a place that serves liquor, you have to wait until one of these other licenses become available. This is just because, you know, long history in Idaho of lots of drunkenness, I guess, in the past, back in the day when it was being settled.
Blue laws in a lot of states where
Yeah,
you couldn't get liquor at all. So
right.
maybe that's somewhere in between.
Right. That's one way of controlling it. So anyway, this woman had sold her liquor license to Red Robin, and I had heard through the grapevine, and then subsequently saw in the paper that she had boarded herself up inside and refused to leave the night that she was losing ownership of that place. So these are, and again, it was something that I sort of saw, kept the newspaper clipping, attached it to a 4x6 card, you know, wrote a little note. And when I was working on these stories, filing through my file, kind of looking for clues to what I might include in the story, I just kind of pulled these things together. So definitely that's a situation where that assemblage approach to art is in full view, is in that story, because I pulled from quite a few experiences. Yeah.
Well, the Diane, the character Diane, was really a criminal. I mean, she was somebody who broke the law in a number of ways. And what I thought was interesting about the way you portrayed her was that you didn't deal in any judgments against her. She was different. She was, in fact, some of the characters you write about are self-destructive. Tell me about the practice of tolerance when it comes to storytelling. I think it's an important element in life, but I'm not sure I've always seen it in the things I've read.
I'm so glad that you said that and that you asked that question, because it is always my goal to even out the playing field in my stories, and to make people look like individual people, and to not be seen as somehow or another representative of a whole, because that's never the case. There's really no such thing as a stereotype except in storytelling. For every person there is on the planet, there's another way of being, and we forget that. We're witnessing that right now on front page news with what's going on in our country. It comes from people judging, basing their viewpoints on judging. And if you know anything about brain structure and about the way our brain chemistry works, as soon as we have passed judgment on something, our ability to think beyond that judgment is completely shut off. It is physiological. So if you are having feelings of intolerance towards somebody, that's because you've passed judgment on that person. There's a reason the Bible says, "Judge not, lest you be judged," because as soon as we have judged another person, our brains have closed down, and really that person has every right to then turn around and judge us, and then the conversation's over. So I feel like the goal of art, the purpose of art, is to remove those. They're really artificial constructs. Judgment is an artificial construct based on some kind of failure within ourselves, and I believe it's our goal as human beings in our personal evolutions to rise to the point where we are not passing judgment on somebody else, where we see everyone else with compassion. Even if we don't understand them, we at the very least give them that bottom line benefit of our compassion and lack of judgment. So I try. That's what I mean. That's what I try to do with my fiction, is to show how that's possible. Listen, helping a woman get an abortion um, is in a day when our patriarchal system has decided that women can't do that, can't control their own fates in that way. Um, is that a crime? I mean, if we declare that a crime, then we have passed judgment on every woman who's in that situation.
Yes.
So it is, whether or not she's a criminal really is based on these kind of established rules
Mhm.
that most of us had nothing to do with establishing.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, you write another story about a very self-destructive girl. I can't remember the title of it, of the story. She just goes from one disaster to the next, and doesn't take good care of herself, and she finally commits murder. Um, the thing that was interesting to me is that you were able to make me understand why she did everything she did. Um, I was horrified, but I was also I also understood that she did what she had to do. At the same time, I could not like that character, but I pondered that story for hours, maybe days. It was very powerful. You know which story I'm talking about.
It's called Cup Full of Nickels.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, about the gal who's on a bus trip to Las Vegas.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was something. It was really wonderful. In the book, in the story, somebody should have scolded the girl. The title story for the book. Um, that story seemed to be about a high functioning marriage between Marlette and Donnie. I was fascinated by the sudden appearance of Sylvia Plath's suicide in the middle of this story about this farming couple and their chores, and Marlette hears about Sylvia Plath dying on the radio. She has no idea who Sylvia Plath is, um, and that she had committed suicide by sticking her head in a gas oven. And of course, that was not long after Donnie had gotten Marlette a new gas stove. And so, anyway, then Marlette, who wasn't the literary type, it didn't seem to me, stuck stuck a chicken dinner, I think it was, into the oven and turned it on low and decided she was going to take off for a faraway town and find a book written by Sylvia Plath. And so, anyway, to me, that was like, okay, here's this woman. She's going to make a break for freedom from her chores. She's going to have a big adventure. And then the story, when she got back, the story took another twist. Can you talk a little bit about that? The story twisted back. It was as if she had this one experience and then she just went back to her regular life.
Well, I think I think in that situation, Marlette, she didn't have much exposure. She was a small town Indiana girl. She had, she and her husband lived on a farm. She's somebody who just stepped into status quo without questioning it. And as far as she knew, she was happy.
Mhm.
And she did go out and have this day and glimpse this other life possibility, but either it just didn't stick, or it was too scary for her, or who knows what really went on deep in her soul. But I feel like we all do that at one time or another. Like, we have an idea about how we could change our lives, and it's within our power always to do that. But not everybody steps out and makes a decision to change. And I do think a lot of times folks make a decision and get partway down the road and decide this is way too much of a headache, or I don't like this after all, and they turn around and go back to either their same life or to a semblance of that life. Um, I have a friend who has remarried the same guy 3 times.
Maybe he'll get it right.
And I mean, she's wonderful. She'll eventually, hopefully, write a book about that experience, and she's written columns about it on Psychology Today. But these two stories are completely unrelated. But it's just sort of an example of how, we see another possibility, we make some effort towards that other possibility, and then maybe we start seeing the possibility that was still behind us, so we turn around and go back to that life. And I just think it's the notion of our higher selves, the notion that there's like some ultimate possibility in our lives is something an ideal we've been sold. I'm not saying that that it isn't possible, but there's this weird thing called the American dream that says that we're just supposed to sacrifice everything for the sake of, like whatever thing that we can imagine that we can do, at the expense of our families, or, security or health or whatever. And so our brains are I think our American brains are really messed up around that. And that's not to say that we shouldn't like jump out and change our lives if we're being abused or something like that. But in Marlette's situation, I kind of feel like she really did the right and noble thing, because she decided to stay where she was and to keep serving her family.
Yes.
And having been through divorce and know the pain that children and everybody suffers when all that takes place, I'm no longer sure that I've often said, as long as nobody's being beaten, you need to stay in the marriage until the kids are grown. I still think that, and I think Marlette was that part of me that sort of wishes, that I had sucked it up and made sure my kids had a stable household through their growing up years. But that's another conversation for another time. But I don't know if that answers that question. I find Marlette to be just extremely interesting for that fact that she could see there was another world out there, but also see that what she was doing at home mattered more. Now, whether Plath's suicide had anything to do with that choice in her, that's left for the reader to decide.
Yes.
I like to think it did. I like to think that she thought that her kids were more valuable than whatever it is that she personally wanted to do.
Yes. Yeah. It was a great story. As we mentioned before, several of your stories take place in bars. And my favorite was Curly's bar and his unique musical talent show night. I loved how you let us know each character as a person before we learned that the bar was full of people who had suffered war or other violent injuries. They were in wheelchairs. Some had missing parts of their bodies, or had a bad heart, or a fatal illness. I think there was one woman there who was struggling with cancer. And then on talent night, there was all of a sudden all this beauty when these people got up on stage and shared their considerable talents. Tell me about the perfectly healthy man who joined the talent show while holding a hook in his hand.
Yes, Caiaphas.
Yeah, that was so moving. Did you ever see that happen, or was that just part of your genius?
No, that's something I just made up. He had other damage. If you kind of read the history behind his name, he sort of, I don't want to tell too much, but he just had another kind of interior damage, and by holding the hook in his hand, and taking on that appearance of this exterior so-called damage, he, I felt like my goal was to have him to be paying tribute to all these people with sort of the obvious changes in their bodies, and what he was saying is that, I'm one of you too. You just can't see what my damage is. And again, so-called damage. We all, none of us gets out of this life unscathed, whether we lose a limb or lose our hearing or have cancer or strokes or horrible diseases or we're psychologically changed, or none of us gets out unscathed. And so that's what he represented, is those of us who are suffering damage that nobody else can really see. But at the same time, he was paying tribute to those people and just saying, I'm one of you, and I want to be one of you, and I want to be seen as your equal, not you as my equal, but I want to be seen as your equal.
Right. I wish I could have gone to a talent show like that. Did you ever have the real experience?
Well, kind of, sort of, yes and no. I did one time get invited by a bunch of softball moms to meet at a place in Lewiston, Idaho called Curly's Alibi. And it's another one of those situations where I, love the name of that bar and just wrote it down on one of my cards that went in my file. And I knew that someday I was going to write a story named Curly's Alibi. Um, and we did land there one night, and it happened to be karaoke night, and it wasn't a night that was dedicated to people with physical differences, but it was a group from the Disability Center came there, a handful of people who had various physical impacts. And so there was like maybe a half dozen of them, and they were all so incredibly talented. It was really, really amazing. And I just sat there with a lump in my throat and tears in my eyes, because I just couldn't believe the beauty of their talent otherwise, as if whatever other limitation they had been funneled through this singing ability. And some of them did duets and various things, and they each of them performed a number of times. There were other people singing too, but this particular group just seemed to take the stage. And so I don't think I wrote them down, but they always just stayed in my mind. And when the idea for Curly's Alibi started coming to fruition on the page, it just made obvious sense to make it about that group of people and to kind of honor them with the story.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was another case of not judging people by the way they look, or by what what you assume they're feeling because they have a physical problem. So it was another example of the tolerance we all need to develop. Because all of us are handicapped in some way, and not every one of us has something that shows on the outside, like the guy with the hook. I'm sorry, I forgot his name. Say it again.
Caiaphas the well, his ship was Caiaphas the second, but he just called himself Caiaphas, who was one of Jesus's betrayers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. The book ends with the novella that you wrote. Tell me the title again. I wasn't good about getting all the titles written down.
Oh, that's okay. Black Oak, or the novella is The Unread Diary of Charlotte Dodge.
Charlotte, yeah. Okay, so it's at the end of the book, and it was a trip no family should have to take. That story was, and it starts out as a diary written to the child Charlotte is carrying in her womb, and it moves from troubles to tragedy and ends up in a brilliant poem pouring out all over us, expressing every emotion we felt as we read the story. It was very powerful, and I hope you didn't know anybody that had to go through all that. Was this all imagination? Can you talk about this story a little?
It was primarily from imagination. There were three pieces that that got pulled together from real life. One of them was the fact that I don't know if I've said this. Early in my life, I was an RN, and in our training, we had to go spend a couple of weeks in Portland at Dornbecker's Children's Hospital.
Oh.
And I got to observe a baby having open heart surgery.
Oh my.
And which was just, it was one of the first ones that were ever done in the country. So it was just an incredible experience. And then and a lot of those babies, unfortunately, when they go through when they're hooked up to that heart-lung bypass machine so that their hearts can be repaired, the result is very often cerebral palsy. At the time, about 50% chance that they would come out with cerebral palsy. Charlotte's baby, Bethany, was a little bit different because she was born with these deformities, like other deformities, not just problems with her heart. But then I also have family who, I have two women in my family whose husbands had to go to prison. And one of them is like way back, but they had to go to prison because their husband had dalliances with small children, or not small children, but with young women. And in both cases, the wife decided to stay with the husband. And I just always thought that was fascinating because I sort of have this feeling like, if somebody did something like that, I would get myself as far away from them as I possibly could. In both cases, these women stayed because of either religious beliefs or other children in the household, and they just didn't know what to do. And one of them was way in the mountains of Kentucky, and it was kind of a weird, different thing. But most of it was made up. The Native American woman who appears, I did do quite a bit of research trying to understand the history of a woman. One of the few women who've been written about who was at the Battle of Big Hole in Montana when the American Army was trying to, they were warring with the Nez Perce people of our region, and there was a woman who survived that battle. So I was trying to bring her into it too. And again, what I was trying to show is that misery and misfortune knows no color boundaries or no ethnic boundaries, and in one way or another, we all suffer in similar ways in this life. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, it was primarily was from imagination, but definitely I had these experiences that filtered in. The woman from Big Hole, that is definitely a situation where I went to a place and did a number of places and did quite a bit of research trying to find out about her, in fact, I probably did more research on her than the entire rest of that novella, just for the privilege of being able to have her appear. Yeah.
Well, it's an amazing story, really. What I saw with this whole group of stories was the common thread of the lives of rural women, I think, maybe some mountain women. I think of all of them, I think all of these stories were set in the 1970s after the Vietnam War. Is that correct?
Well, for the most part, the title story, Somebody Should Have Scolded the Girl, was in the 1960s. I actually played with time in that story a little bit because I moved Sylvia Plath's death to a little bit later in the 60s just to serve my own purposes. But yes, for the most part, in and around the Vietnam War, or just after.
Afterwards, yeah.
Definitely the war is a shadow throughout.
Right. Do you think in putting together a collection of short stories that a common thread is necessary to form a kind of a good collection?
Oh, I think so. Either in the form of recurring metaphor, or some kind of overarching theme, or ultimate revelation about the time, a time and place. For in this case, war was definitely war, and rural women. Were definitely the two
Yeah.
threads.
One of the things I noticed about all the rural women, I guess it's one of my judgments. I was surprised that they all were so extremely intelligent. Even if they didn't have degrees, or they didn't have whatever, some of them did, but um, they were very intelligent women, and and I don't know, I admired most of them. And uh, I don't know where I'm headed with this, but um, they were, I don't know. Did you notice that they were intelligent?
Well, yes, and thank you so much for bringing that up, because there's nothing that makes me crazier than the stereotype of
Yeah.
hillbilly people.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have our stereotype of Native of Americans, and stereotype of Asian Americans, and stereotype of every American who
Yeah,
isn't
African
white.
Americans, yeah.
But the stereotype of hillbilly people is so completely inaccurate. Do you have any idea how smart you have to be able to live off the land the way they did?
Yeah.
And was there, some inbreeding and incest? Yes, unfortunately, there was, but there are also historical uh, precedents for that among the Celtic people, and a lot of people down there were descended from Celts. You may know this. Back in the old days, one way to control numbers was for men to take to their prepubescent daughters rather than make another baby. Of course, it's all about the male, right?
Yeah.
In that situation, it's a horrible thing, but it's a truth. Way back in our history, and awful lot of Scottish and Irish people settled in those hills, and stuff happens when you don't get exposure to sunlight to brains. And I've always thought, that's part of it. We lived at the base of these sort of hollers, these drainages that were kind of protected from the elements. And I mean, I'm saying stuff that is going to have people are going to rain hell down on me, but it's really true. That's where that incestuous tendency came from. And so so awful things did happen, but these were all very intelligent, very capable people. You mix that in with the fact that a lot of them had intermarried with, kind of the triangle is Native American, Scottish, and African American, or freed Africans. That's kind of the ethnic background that we all come from, and you're talking about, three types of people that are very intelligent and very capable. They know how to survive.
Yeah.
And so I just get infuriated. Nothing, the worst movie in the world to me is Deliverance, because that is like the one picture they had of what an Appalachian person is like. Stupid things like Little Abner, the comics, they
Yeah.
all get it wrong. They
Yeah.
all get it completely wrong. My grandmothers made their own candles, their own soap, their own butter. They milk cows. They could butcher a hog or a cow. They made their own clothing.
Yeah.
They wove yarn, or did sheep and spun yarn, and they made fabrics on
I'm sure
looms.
they tend gardens and
Oh my gosh, yes, gigantic. Neither of my grandmothers had problems with pests in gardens because they knew to turn the chickens loose in the gardens, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, and it's crazy, crazy the labor intensive lives these people led and the ingenuity involved in the way they lived. And people just have it completely wrong. They have it so wrong. My dad's mother ran the schoolhouse, the state schoolhouse, the one-room schoolhouse. Um, a couple, a few, however far over, everybody loaded onto mulebacks and drove over to school, rode over to school every morning. I mean, it's yeah. So that's what I wanted. One of the things that was really important to me to show in this book, and I am going to do a novel based. I'm working, starting the research. I'm in the research process for a novel called Black Oak and Sugar Tree, based on Mercy Grace's experience, and she's the one who lived down in the mountains of Kentucky.
Yes.
So the more research I do about my own people, just the more amazed I am, especially the knowledge and wisdom of the Cherokee and Cree, the ones who stayed behind and fled the government and hid in the hills and then intermarried with people, with other people. They what they were their level of intelligence was astonishing, really.
I
As
spent a number of years living in West Virginia.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. So
and I
you
lived in a hollow that,
Mhm.
or holla, however you say it. Um, with my husband was with the Associated Press there, and so I got the experience of living in a place with a group of people that were all related to each other, and we were the strangers on the in the hollow, and so it was really an interesting experience there. I lived there probably 6 years, two different times. So um, anyway, so I think I have a little bit of an idea of uh, at least what it looked like, what it looks like in those mountains, and about the family connections and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
So, so what are you writing now? You mentioned that novel that about Mercy Grace. Is there? How far are you with it?
Well, I'm in research and note-taking stage now, which will go on for a while. I'm trying to finish up a new collection of poetry, and then I have a memoir draft that I've got 250 60 pages of rough draft. It's the third in the Blue Moon series of books.
Oh,
It's
good.
it's called Great Wisdom of the Body, and it is basically kind of a physical inventory. I've suffered lots in my health over my lifetime, having to do with the fact that my mother force fed me antibiotics when I was a kid for every little sniffle, and
Oh,
that's caused a lifetime of health problems for me. But so I've learned lots about home remedies and how to take care of yourself, because Western medicine just is really clueless about a lot of these chronic issues that don't directly arise from a pathogen.
yeah.
um, so I've learned lots about traditional Chinese medicine and home remedies and diet. And so that whole book is kind of a continuation of the physical exploration that I started with Blue Moon Vegetarian and Blue Moon Vegan. It veers away from diet so much and more into physiology um, and this notion of being able to heal yourself. Uh,
Yes.
yeah,
What's the saying? Physician, heal thyself.
right, right. Everybody who knows me knows this, and that is, I think Western medicine has gone way, way, way off track,
Yeah.
and I'm much more impressed with the viewpoint from traditional Chinese medicine, which is a 5,000-year-old practice, than I am, and from what plants have to give us, the healing properties of plants. As you know, much of Western medicine comes from the old plant-based remedies, but unfortunately, what they've done is to extract certain elements from the plant and focus on that one or two particular chemicals rather than understanding that it's the entire plant that's involved in the healing of a person or a symptom. It's not just one or two components. So Western medicine was way off track, as we know. It's an industry now, and it's just all about making money and not about actually healing people. Sometimes it's about curing, but it's never ever about healing from the ground up, and that's what interests me, and that's the focus of this book.
Right. Well, I think the American diet is also a great handicap for us all. The way we eat, and
Yeah.
and also the way our food is processed,
Yes.
etc. Well, anyway, we could have another talk about that someday.
Hopefully we will.
Paula, I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you.
And do you want to add anything? Anything more? Or excuse me, it sounds like it's time for me to say bye.
Well, I don't have nothing else really to add other than saying that I love what we're doing here. As we know, we've all sort of lost our venues, all of us writers. We no more readings, no more conferences, no more workshops. So I love it that authors are jumping in and finding other ways to get each other in front of the public, and this is just a wonderful thing. So I appreciate it very much, and I think we should give a little plug for Fawkes Press too while we're here.
Do that. That's our publisher. Yeah. Yes, they are wonderful, and I'm thankful for it. Well, it's almost like a family, isn't it?
It is, and they have great taste in books.
Yeah, yes, they do. Yeah. So, I mean, they publish our books. So, well, anyway, it's been a great pleasure to speak with you, and I hope I get to meet you someday in person.
That sounds really good to me, Karen.
Okay. All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.